Yes. All right, welcome everyone. It is 6:06, and I'm calling the September 2nd, 2020 Bothell Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purpose of the meeting tonight is to hold public hearings on the Downtown Public Space Code Amendments and Canyon Park Subarea Plan update. Public hearing on Canyon Park will be continued until September 16th and again to October 7th. So we'll be hearing more about this one. Before we move to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our meeting format. Proclamation 20-28 regarding open public meetings has been extended, so this meeting will be held remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing and orally. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. People wishing to comment were instructed to notify staff or provide written comments by 3 p.m. today. The video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone and listen to the live meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so everyone can follow along. And those who provided advance notice are able to make comments under the audience comment portion of the meeting. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. At this point, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners. We have Commissioner Karsten Kurd, Commissioner Dave Lett, Commissioner Jeannie Alderks, Commissioner Sarah Gustafson, and do we have someone on the phone?
No.
No? Okay. A little disorganized because of our audio problems. We have several commissioners who are absent and excused. Commissioner Peastrup and Commissioner Olson are both absent and excused. So in addition, we have the following city staff in attendance: Community Development Director Mike Ketterman and Senior Planner Dave Boyd. Lastly, before I begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines for all attendees. Please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn off the sound as there is a delay. And for the commissioners, at the specific breaks in the presentation, I will be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you wish to speak, please indicate this by holding up the yellow speaker cards in the lower portion of your screen. I will call on you as I see them. And sometimes people bounce around on the screen, so I may need to take a minute to be sure I get you. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, or second a motion, or participate in debate. And please mute your microphone when not speaking. So, moving on to our agenda. The first item on the agenda is public comment. In keeping with Governor Jay Inslee's Emergency Proclamation 20-28 regarding public meetings and gatherings, as well as open public meetings, the city has accepted visitor comment in writing, as well as accepted sign-up sheets for no sign-up sheets tonight. Written comments submitted to the staff no longer than 3 p.m. were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. So, Director Cutterman, please let us know if there are any comments other than on the 2 agenda items.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no comments submitted and no speakers have signed up other than for the public meeting this evening on Canyon Park. So I received no other correspondence. I would also like to add one thing to the record. If I could, you announced the staff present. I also want to note that Steve Morikawa from Public Works is also present for the meeting this evening. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So moving on to the agenda, first item, the next item rather, is the approval of the minutes. We have 3 sets of meeting minutes to approve tonight, and we'll address each separately. So I'll seek a motion to approve each, a second, and then we'll discuss any needed modifications. So do I have a motion to approve the July 1st, 2020? Commissioner Blett.
Yeah, I move to approve the July 1st minutes as written.
All right, thank you. Do we have a second? Commissioner Kurd.
I second the motion.
All right, any discussion regarding the minutes as distributed? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the July 1st, 2020 minutes, please indicate. I guess we can raise our hands. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All in favor. So the July 1st, 2020 minutes are approved as submitted. Moving on to the July 8th, 2020 minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Commissioner Curd.
I move to approve the July 8th, 2020 minutes as written.
And is there a second? Commissioner Aldrich.
I second that motion.
All right, the motion has been submitted and seconded. Any discussion on the July 8th, 2020 minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the July 8th, 2020 minutes, please indicate. 2, 3, 4. Commissioner Aldrich, are you? Yes, okay. All in favor of the minutes are adopted. Thank you. And our third and final set of minutes, July 22nd, 2020. Is there a motion to approve the July 22nd minutes? Oh, Commissioner Vliet.
I move to adopt the July 22nd of 2020 minutes as written.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion to adopt? Commissioner Gustafson. You're muted.
I second the motion to accept those minutes as written.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to adopt the minutes, the July 22nd, 2020 minutes. Any discussion concerning those minutes? Commissioner Aldrich.
I noticed on page 11 of the packet that we received that my last name is missing a K. I would ask to correct the spelling on my last name.
Okay, so we'll amend the minutes to correct the spelling. Any other discussion? Okay, and I'll ask if commissioners vote to adopt the minutes as amended. All in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. 1, 2. And all approved, so the July 22nd, 2020 minutes are adopted. Now we're moving on public shuffled night agenda. Apologize for the disorganization. Our start was rocky. Here we go. Is there any new business to discuss tonight? Director? No, no new business. Okay. With that, we will move on to the public hearing on the downtown public space amendments. There will be a staff presentation followed by a public hearing. Our goal tonight is to adopt a recommendation on this. So with that, I will turn it over to Senior Planner Dave Boyd. I cannot hear you. Nope, still no.
Oh, I may have muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Dave. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you and good evening. If you can pull up the presentation. I actually do have it here, but I don't trust that I can share it. I can try.
Working. Hang on.
yeah, on my end, it's doing the same thing with sharing content as it did with connecting to audio. So it's spinning around.
I'm seeing it on my screen.
Oh. Are others seeing it? I'm not seeing.
I see it. I see Commissioner Kurd indicated he sees it.
It's the, I'm showing the title slide, Dave.
Okay. Well, I've got I've got it up on my screen. I'm not sure if we're looking at the exact, but I'll try to synchronize. As Chair Kiernan said, that the purpose of tonight's meeting is to review the proposed amendments, take public testimony, and make a recommendation to council. We're hoping to take this to council in October. Next.
Slide 2.
Slide 2, just a reminder that the basis for these downtown public space requirements in the community vision portion of the downtown sub-area plan is to create a sequence of unfolding spaces that inspire people to walk and to linger in the center of the city. And as these two diagrams show, one shows the open space network, which also consists of key street rights-of-way that connect a series of open spaces, and in the illustration also showing in a little more detail how a series of public and private open spaces make up this network that's called for in the downtown plan. Next. And I'm just going to highlight the areas that we have covered in these code amendments. So the first one that we tackled, and this goes way back to last July, not July of 2019, that is, was the quality of the open space. There were concerns that the open spaces were not sufficiently inviting, that it wasn't clear that they were open to the public or that they were public spaces at all. And there were some criticisms of just the quality of the spaces. So there are a number of amendments that we made to address that. First of all, we are requiring signage to make it clear that the spaces are public. And there is we do encourage the signage to also be combined with interpretive elements, as shown in this sign on the plaza at the Merc. In the lower right, the guidelines beefed up in terms of encouraging art and landscaping. It's fairly visible there, but there is a small public space, public art piece in this landscaped area in the lower right, photo on the lower right. And then moving over to the upper left, there's stronger guidelines for including seating where appropriate. There are guidelines to better address blank wall treatment, which this space demonstrates would certainly be, would benefit from better treatment of the blank wall. And to strengthen the requirement that there be direct access from the sidewalks. So that, in a nutshell, covers most of the elements regarding the quality of the open spaces. Next slide, slide number 4, deals with the quantity of the open space, and we spent a fair amount of time on this item. The analysis showed that townhome projects like the ones shown on this image have met or exceeded the current requirements, mostly with passages minimum 20-foot wide landscaped passages with a minimum 6-foot wide walkway that connect through the site and connect to other parts of the pedestrian network and to other elements within the downtown plan. So this is, these images are from Dawson Square, just to show, and there's some numbers here showing what was provided there, over 8,600 square feet. That was almost 2,000 square feet more than was required at the current 150 square feet per unit. As you recall, we looked at reducing the requirement per unit to 90 square feet, but that would have gotten us substantially less public space on these sites, which again, we're able to meet the current requirement. So our proposed requirement based on 9% of the net floor area gets us right about at what they provided here at 8,400 square feet. Next slide. Unlike the townhome projects, apartment projects in downtown have really struggled to meet the requirement. These images are from the addition apartments that provided a little over 6,000 square feet, whereas the requirement would have been 13,500. So they provided the remainder in lieu fees. One thing that we're trying to get away from in these code amendments is reliance on the in lieu fees. So reducing the requirement to 90 square feet per unit did create a reduction. Some commissioners felt that was too much of a reduction in the case of these, the apartment projects. And so we wound up with a more modest reduction based on the net floor area of a little over 12,000 square feet, and that they could then reduce to a little under 11,000 square feet with a 10% in lieu fee allowance, which would be allowed for larger projects such as this. Next. The third item that we've addressed is flexibility. We have, through code interpretations, we have allowed projects like the 104 and 6 Oaks, which were shown on this slide, which were done by the same developer, to transfer some of the required open space from, in this case, from the 104 to 6 Oaks. We've also allowed required public space to substitute for building when applying building frontage, build to corner, and wrapping requirements. In these code amendments, we're codifying that and making it explicit that that is how we are applying this code. And all of those are to provide some flexibility for development while still achieving quality public spaces. So next slide. This is another aspect of flexibility is to allow otherwise non-conforming connections to pedestrian and public space networks, including off-site improvements, to count toward the public space requirement. So this is an example of the POP, which provided a passage along the north side of the building that is shared between the setback, which goes down to as little as 5 feet on the POP project, with adjacent space on the Popkini Stadium site. So through an easement with North Shore School District, the developers got permission to develop that entire space and connect the public passage on the west side of their building around the north side to Horse Creek Plaza to the east. So that it creates a circuit so we're not creating any dead-end public spaces here. Another example of this is the 98th Avenue apartments, which provide a connection a pedestrian connection along the line of 183rd Street from 98th over to the dead end of 183rd to the west. Another aspect of this is the code amendments do require easements now to maintain the and require the developers to maintain the public space. That was implicit in the requirement previously, but we've made that explicit in the code and required the easements so that the requirement for these public open spaces and their maintenance runs with the land and will be passed on to new owners. Next. So that concludes, in a very brief way, the ground that we've covered over the last year in these code amendments. And so at this point, I would open it up to the Commission for any questions and comments, after which we can take public testimony if there is any, move into deliberations, and then a motion to approve the findings, conclusions, and recommendations summarized in the bullets here to strengthen the provisions to create better quality public spaces, to revise the method of calculating public space requirement, to address differences between townhomes and apartments, and to exempt small projects and limit the use of in lieu fees for large projects. So with that, are there any questions or comments?
Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. I have a small technical comment that I brought up at the June 3rd meeting. I don't know if it's been addressed yet in the current schedule of proposed requirements for open space. When I look at page 18 of our agenda, I see the 10% in lieu fee limit would not apply to projects with a requirement of less than 3,000 square feet. And my issue with that is that if I run the numbers, if I have a 3,000 square foot project, it falls under the limit, so it could get all 3,000 square foot of its requirement as an in lieu fee. But if you had a slightly bigger project, which would be say 3,500 square foot, it could only get 10% of its square footage requirement as an in lieu fee. So I think what you'd get is very different outcomes for very similar projects. I think we had a discussion that we were going to try to look at that limit and see if there might be a way to phase it or stack it so that similar projects would have similar outcomes. Let me know if that rings a bell, please.
It does. I do recall that discussion. I did not come up with a gradated way to do that. I think in reality, we're giving the projects that generate a requirement of between 1,000 and 3,000 square feet the option of using in lieu fee. I think that on any site of that size that is able to do it, or they will. Our past experiences, the developers provide as much of that as they can to avoid having to pay the in lieu fee. But this would provide flexibility for those medium-sized sites that might have other physical constraints to use the in lieu fee. The larger sites, any site that is requiring 3,000 square feet or more, we feel has the flexibility to provide that public space on site with that limited in lieu fee allowance.
Okay, I mean, you have the experience with developers. If this is not something that people are really looking into and they're really trying to build out more than using the in lieu fee, perhaps this is a non-issue.
like I said, I do believe that that developers will try to provide this on site to avoid paying the in lieu fee. And now we have with the limitations that we've imposed on the larger projects, we have a stronger leverage to make sure that they are providing it on site.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So public hearing. And I don't believe we have any public wishing to comment.
I don't know. I need to check.
Okay.
So we've had several callers that have joined us, and I don't know who all of them are yet and whether they want to testify on this particular item. So I'm going to ask, so I'm going to start with phone number, area code 206, last two digits are 77. Would you like to, are you here to testify on this item or Canyon Park, or are you just listening?
This is Tim McCarg. Hi, Mike.
Hi,
yeah,
Tim.
I have no desire to testify on this item. Thank you, though.
Okay.
I will
Did you want
perhaps testify later on Canyon Park.
Okay, so you do want to testify on Canyon Park. Okay,
Yes, please. Thank you.
thank you. Got you down for that one. Thank you. Okay, then who else here? So next, I have area code 206. Last two digits are 29. Did you wish to testify on this item or the Canyon Park item, or neither? Last two digits of your phone number are 29. Did you wish to testify? Area code 206. Last two digits are 29. You're unmuted. Could you please respond? Okay, we'll move on. We'll assume that's a no. And we'll check again later on Canyon Park. Next one I have is area code 206. Last two digits are 50. Did you wish to testify on this item or Canyon Park, or just listening?
Just listening.
Thank you. And then, thought I had one more. I think that was.
We've got 6 call-ins.
Yeah, and I've accounted for all 6. So I think we're good.
Okay, so with that, we will close the public hearing. Is there a motion to close the public hearing? Commissioner Curd.
I move to close the public hearing on the Downtown Public Space Code amendments.
Thank you. Commissioner Fleet.
Second the motion from Commissioner Curd.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded that we close the public hearing for the Downtown Public Space Code amendments. All in favor, please. I don't see you all. All in favor, please indicate. Okay, Commissioner Aldrich. Your video is off. Okay. It has been moved and seconded and unanimously passed to close the public hearing. So with that, we'll begin deliberations on the code changes and recommendation. Now, can we pull up the code? All right. So I propose we go through the code changes first, then move on to the amendments, and then vote as appropriate.
I do not seem to be able to share the code myself.
Okay, I believe we're working on this end. Okay, we have content coming. Here we go. Yes. All right, and if possible, let's focus on the changes. So, can you all hear me? Am I coming through? Okay. Bouncing in and out of these headphones. So this first page, what we call it, we settle on the outdoor space. Any comments on this first page as we scroll down? We could go down a little more.
Dave, did you want to make any comments on these changes, the first page of the code regarding outdoor space?
Yes, the change in terminology, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
The change in terminology was primarily to avoid any confusion with our parks and open space impact requirements. So that's why we've changed open space to outdoor space and public open space requirements to just public space requirements.
So the other changes here, if I'm correct, Dave, just correct me if I'm wrong, but we're adding a requirement for residential for outdoor space that we did not have before.
Yes, this first table has to do with the downtown core district, and there isn't currently a requirement for the private outdoor space, but all of the developments that we've had in the downtown core have provided it, either in the form of upper level terraces, balconies, or roof gardens. And we do think that those add to the quality of the buildings, and the balconies add to the modulation of the exterior. So we thought it was worthwhile to add that requirement in.
And then in the downtown neighborhood district, in addition to the name change, where we are amending to move to the 6% net floor area requirement versus the per square foot requirement based on either number of rooms or number of square feet of office.
Correct. And in all of these districts, we're also removing the line that deals with home occupations, since all residential uses allow home occupations. There was no reason to have that requirement. And in the case of downtown neighborhood, we're replacing that line. We're creating two lines of residential, one for townhomes and one for apartments. So 6% for townhomes and 10% for apartments. And actually, that's a typo. It should be 9% for townhomes. No, I'm sorry. No, this is right. In downtown neighborhood, 6% for townhomes and 10% for apartments.
So it's
Okay,
6%
thank you.
for office, 6% for lodging, 6% for townhomes, and 10% for apartments.
Yeah, in terms of office and lodging, we just changed it from the 60 square feet per 1,000 square feet to just a percentage, so that we're consistent. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the same amount, yeah, just different terminology.
Okay.
So now,
Not seeing any comments. We'll move to the next page.
so for downtown transition, again, just changing to a percent for office and lodging, and then going from 100 square feet per unit to 9% of floor area for townhomes and 15% of net floor area for apartments. Then in both of the corridor districts, SR 522 and General Downtown Corridor, again, changing the terminology for office and lodging to percentages, and going with the same 9% for townhomes and 15% for apartments. I do see a typo in the General Downtown Corridor. The 10% net floor area for townhomes should be 9%, the same as in those other transitional districts. And I'm not able to.
So we'll amend. So we're talking in 12.64.304, provision of outdoor space, 12.64.201 building use, and that 10 will become a 9 for the, and I see Director Crowderman making a note of that. Okay. So scrolling down.
Okay, so in the Sunrise Valley View district, that's essentially our downtown single family area. There is a requirement for public open space there, but it really is not needed. No other single family zones have that. So we have, I think that was an error in the original drafting of this code, and we haven't really had any development there. And so basically the setbacks provide adequate private open space, and single family doesn't require any public open space. on the lots. Similarly, for parks and public open space, there's residential uses aren't really allowed there, so we're just removing those cells from the table. And then in moving down to 1264-304, this is again where the initial changes are the change in terminology. At the bottom of the page under B1 is the change where we add language that the public space will be a percentage of the net floor area and defines that. And then moving to page 4, the provision that allows projects that require 3,000 square feet or less to use the in lieu fee, and projects that require more to use up to 10%. They're required, or to pay an in lieu fee in lieu of 10% of their required public space. Throughout, we're changing the terminology to move the open space references. 4 and 5, if you scroll up just a bit, are just the new provisions to allow a developer to transfer public space between developments within a half mile. And 5 is to address a concern about what these in lieu fees can be used for. And we're not getting into any details, but we're just saying that they can be used to create, enhance, or activate public space, including street rights of way in the downtown sub area. That will be an administrative function to determine how to use those fees. So moving down, here's where we get into more of the qualitative amendments that we addressed very early in this process, changing the hours of access from 24 hours a day to match the hours for access for public parks, which is 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. That's in subsection C there. Subsection D specifies that the property owner shall maintain them and shall provide a public access easement that runs with the property. And E is the beefing up the requirement of for accessibility from surrounding streets and sidewalks. F is the requirement to provide a signage that the spaces are open to the public, and a preference given to signage that also performs some interpretive function or explaining the history or special features of the site, and also providing wayfinding for passages to let people know where the passages lead to. G is again codifying what we have allowed through interpretation to let required public open space function as frontage coverage and to meet the build to corner and wrapping requirements in the development regulations.
Stop right there.
Okay.
And see if I wasn't able to see anybody. I don't know if there are any questions.
Yes, Commissioner Vliet has a question or comment.
A comment. Just so far, the presentation's awesome, Dave. Thank you very much. I just had with regards to, I guess I've expressed this in the past, with regards to any signage requirement, I think it is maybe good to have some historical component to that. I'm really all in favor personally of minimal. I don't know. I don't want it to be look all very cluttered. I want it to look kind of clean because I know this is going to kind of exist, and I hope we can come up. The city will come up with some kind of design that they'll kind of just use so people just know, oh, that's the public space for me, and that's it. I just don't think it needs to have a lot of words and stuff on it. I mean, I'd like it to look. There's already enough signage everywhere, and I think it'd be nice if it was just clean and simple. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a good point. And I share that sentiment.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? Seeing none, I think we can return to the code and continue through.
Okay, picking up with the private open space, there wasn't much change there. We do specifically call out roof decks and terraces as qualifying for the private open space requirement. That's really the only change there. Under subsection B, landscaping, we've added number 2B2 to beef up the requirements for landscaping of public spaces. We understand that some of these spaces are on top of garage structures, and so there are limitations, but we felt that it was important to encourage as much landscaping as possible, and then in C to address blank walls explicitly. Moving down to 1264-306. These are, now we're getting into the guidelines. These are items that where we feel that there's a need for some flexibility, so they're not absolute requirements. But again, here's where we added language to beef up the preference for a public space that's at or near the sidewalk level. And then some guidelines for how spaces that on a steep slope where you might site where you might need to have some spaces that are not right at sidewalk level, how to address those. And also the need for both active and passive surveillance so that we have eyes on these open spaces. Then number 3 below, this was a suggestion from our review staff that just to encourage that projects that have grouped outdoor mailbox areas, that those are good areas to create small gathering spaces for those communities. Any questions, comments there? We have a little bit of a break. Not seeing any.
I have one. Commissioner Aldrich's here.
Commissioner. Okay, Commissioner Gustafson first, and then Aldrichs. Commissioner Aldrichs.
Hi, on page 5, item C, where it talks about any blanks walls, let's correct that to blank. Also, what do you mean by architecturally treated, please? I don't quite understand that.
Architecturally treated is, I guess, a term that's known in the construction trade, but it just means that rather than a rough formed concrete wall, that there are either scoring patterns or some sort of patterns or some finish treatment to give the concrete a more finished look than just a rough what you would see in a typical basement wall.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Aldrichs.
Thank you, Commissioner Aldrich's here. My question is actually about the same item that Commissioner Gustafson brought up, and that is when it says shall be treated architecturally or with plantings, does that preclude like a public art installation that might go on that wall?
No, it doesn't. I think that could fall within the architectural treatments, include murals and other decorative treatments.
Could we specify that, like actually spell it out here within this, within these recommendations, that it would say treated architecturally with a public, with public art or with plantings, just so that we, I'd say, inspire people to bring, beautiful expression into the city core. That's one way to say it.
That would be easy to add. Just
okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other? So Commissioner Aldrich has recommended we modify that portion to include public art with architectural treatment or plantings. Is there a consensus among the commissioners that that change be made? I see Commissioner Kerr nodding yes. Commissioner Vliet? Muted.
Sorry. But that still allows the developer to be able to just treat the wall with like as Dave said, with some type of just lines or some type of something other than they don't have to put an art installation there or a mural, which is super cool, and I hope they do a lot of that. But they can still do that as well, right? It's just saying they can put art, public art. Okay.
Permissive, but not required.
Got it. Thank you. Great idea.
Commissioner Gustafson. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Gustafson here. There is a subsequent item about passive surveillance or video surveillance. How would that video surveillance work? Would it be something that would be reviewed on site? Would it be forwarded to the police department? What might the code section imply? Thank you.
well, this was kind of an outgrowth of that passage along the north side of the POP, where one of the concerns was to make sure that that was a defensible space, and also that there were eyes on that space, that the apartments above could look down into that passage, that it would not be a hidden space, and in addition to the passive surveillance, in that case, it was felt that it would be appropriate to also have video surveillance, so that which serves two purposes. It lets people know that they are not in a hidden place, and it also then does provide something that can be used either by the property manager to maintain and enforce proper use of those areas, and potentially, if a crime is committed, that could be potentially be shared with the police.
I think just to add on to that a little bit, it's not a closed circuit system, so it's not live. It's a tape, typically, is how it's set up, and it's used if there is an incident at some point. So it's not a direct feed to the police or to the management office, unless they set it up as a direct feed to the manager's office. But this is really just, I think, intended to be more of a recording device, as I said, to discourage any illicit activity.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some problems with this. I know that we are at the end of the line here. with this discussion, but it seems to me that any space that would require so much surveillance, both passive surveillance from eyes looking down and video surveillance, is perhaps not the kind of public space that we would want in the first place, because it seems like it is flawed and these surveillance measures are trying to fix a bigger issue here with the usability of the space. We know that surveillance measures can often have bad unintended consequences for people of color. Thank you.
Okay. So we had two issues we were discussing. One is the inclusion of the public art in the wall treatments, and the second is Commissioner Gustafson's concern about surveillance. Now, I would like to close up on the public art. I'm not hearing any objections to that. Can I assume the commission supports that modification? Okay, so we'll close that. And then as far as surveillance, any other commissioners want to weigh in on that question? Seeing none.
I think I might be off your screen. This is Jenny Alders.
Yeah, I'm not getting video. It's saying low bandwidth or local computer conditions, so we don't see you at all.
Oh, I have video. I see myself. I'm sorry you do not see me.
Oh, I apologize for not recognizing you.
That's okay. So for future, thank you for letting me know that. And so if I'll just pop up on mute or unmute myself so that you can recognize me. So thank you. Thank you for recognizing me. And on the topic of surveillance, I want to clarify if it both requires passive surveillance and electronic surveillance, or if it is one or the other at the discretion of the property owner.
Could we pull back that section of the code?
As it's written, public spaces that extend into the site should, and again, this is a guideline, it should include both active and passive surveillance. And that's the approach we took with that the passage around the backside of the POP.
So this has some discretion built. This is Mike Cotterman. So this has some discretion built into it because it is a guideline and because it says should rather than shall. It means that this would be the type of thing that the staff would review as part of the project proposal. And if we identified spaces that looked like they could create, or if there were public comments that came up regarding some spaces that were created, then these are the things that we would negotiate with the applicant to make sure that it's addressing some of those issues. Just thinking in terms of those situations, so going back to Commissioner Gustafson's comment about whether these would be the types of spaces we would want, the other option is to put some additional language in here that maybe strengthens the preferred language into should be or something along those lines. I don't know, Dave, maybe you have some other suggestions.
Well, I guess I would say that passive surveillance, having eyes on the street, having eyes into these kind of public gathering spaces, is generally considered just a good urban design treatment. So one suggestion would be to put passive first, and perhaps then add and and something like and in some cases active surveillance, so that it wasn't always a requirement, but only in certain situations.
And I would note that, and I see Commissioner Vliet, I'll recognize you in a moment. I would note that this only applies to spaces that are not at or near the sidewalk level. So the more public spaces, the more open spaces do not have this requirement. So Commissioner Vliet, you have a comment?
Yes. Maybe you could read, I think we were getting there already, and I can start, avoid dead-end spaces and have passive surveillance, i.e. overlooking windows, decks, terraces, and or balconies. And then the rest was something like, and potentially video if deemed necessary by community development director or the person who's overseeing the project on the city side. I think I'm also more comfortable with less kind of video surveillance being out there and around. I think we already have I know the world's kind of going that direction, but I don't think we need to, I'm kind of a little uncomfortable making it a requirement. So.
Well, note that it is not a requirement, it's a recommendation.
Guideline.
Or guideline.
Or recommendation, yeah, or I don't know. When I say should, I take it pretty much as almost a requirement, but I don't know.
That's not how we treat it as staff.
But I think the suggestion of putting passive first and then making the active surveillance as a if needed, if deemed necessary, does make sense.
Jenny Aldrich's here, seeking to be recognized.
Okay, Commissioner Aldrichs.
Thank you. Jenny Aldrich's here. I appreciate the discussion of rewording this, and I think that I like what Commissioner Vliet was saying, that we would put passive first, and then maybe it's just and or active video surveillance, and then decide whose discretion is it, at the discretion of the city manager, the city development officer, the property owner, and just decide whose discretion decides that there will be video in that space.
So I heard, well, Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is Karsten speaking. I like what Commissioner Aldrichs just said about deciding who has the kind of authority to decide. I think it should probably be community development, because they would have been involved with the planning phases of and design of the structure and outdoor spaces. They also have a better frame of reference for interactions between other projects and other corridors, like sidewalks, etc. One thing that I'm still kind of wondering is if this strictly applies to public space that's not connected to the sidewalk. If they're disjointed, then this has sort of a different application. I know from personal experience walking through Dawson Square, almost, well, it seems like the vast majority of the front doors on all of those structures, which directly abut the public open space, have Ring doorbells, the video monitored systems. And so it is a little bit eerie just walking through and seeing that you're being monitored, every movement is being monitored. But that's something that would be the discretion of those homeowners and wouldn't necessarily be able to be controlled by community development or the city. So I think that whose discretion this is at is pretty important to define right now.
This is Mike Cotterman. To address Commissioner Curd's comment. I think the discretion rests with both the community development department and with the applicant in this case, because it's a guideline. It's something that we would strongly request of them. We might have enough ability to require it in some instances. Typically, it's a negotiated item as part of an overall package when it's a guideline like that. But it gives us, it gives the applicant pretty good direction as to what we're looking for, why, and what the options are for addressing that. So if we don't address it through this, we look at other means of doing that. The discretion at this point is already implied in the language, in fact, where it resides in the code. So what I'm hearing is we want to downplay the active surveillance aspect of this. And I think I heard a suggestion from Commissioner Bleet and general support for, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to overstate or misstate what the commission is suggesting. But to start with the passive and then say, and in some instances may necessitate consideration of active surveillance or something along those lines, but really minimize the necessity for that as far as the language in here. And again, I think Mr. Kerr pointed out, it is important to keep in mind that these are in limited circumstances. This is not in all circumstances. And frankly, some of the public spaces that have been created in downtown that are not at the sidewalk level have not been the most desirable. And it's not because of security or safety reasons. It's just because they're not as visible and they're probably not going to be used as much by the public. So I think we're going to try to not have many of these spaces, if any, in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so Commissioner Gustafson, are you seeking to be recognized?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Cotterman. I do think that these public spaces that are completely removed from the sidewalk are very undesirable. Public spaces that link between the sidewalk and going into the private space are very desirable. I do hope that we will see very few of these. They do not seem high quality at this point from what we've learned. I will make one more push about the idea of passive surveillance. I dislike the word surveillance. It makes it seem like it is the job of the residents to stand up there and call people out who are down below. I don't know if there's a way to frame it as positive public presence instead, to just reframe the idea of how it should be designed. I've seen surveillance designs that look scary, and I've seen public presence designs that look very inviting. I'm wondering if we could clarify that there. Thank you.
Okay,
Good. Can I take addressing that?
Sure, please.
Okay. I would suggest that the end of that subsection B2 read that these public spaces that are not at sidewalk level or that extend into the site should include wayfinding signage, void dead-end spaces, and have passive connections instead of surveillance, i.e. overlooking windows, decks, terraces, and/or balconies, and if deemed necessary, active, i.e. video surveillance.
I see one commissioner, two commissioners nodding their heads, and I don't see the rest of you. Did we lose? Oh, there's Commissioner Bleet. That sound okay to you? Okay. And again, Commissioner Aldrich, I cannot see you.
All right, I'm here. I did try to turn my video on and turn it back off and back on, and it didn't work. So we're gonna just do our best. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine.
And you know, with my fellow commissioners' agreement, I would agree to that as well.
Okay, so I think we have a consensus with that change. So did we capture that? Okay, I think we're good.
Good.
So shall we go back to the code and proceed through?
think we're getting close.
Yeah, we talked about the mailboxes.
Much of this was left in there just for context.
There's a reference to architect.
That's all we have.
Okay, that is code. So having reviewed the code, let's go to the recommendations. And our intent here is to vote on, to review these, amend them as needed, and then vote to approve them. So, history, a lot of the first page is pretty much boilerplate. Second page, process. Describing our deliberations.
So these specific findings are kind of the meat of the findings. I think 6 through 13.
Yeah, let's move up to 6. Move up to number 6 there. So we make the findings. Let everyone read them for themselves. Number 10 in particular talks about the change to floor area. And 12 is a small project exemption that we had some discussion around.
And there were no additional exhibits or testimony to add.
So pausing on the conclusions. Again, the amendments drafted, notice reviewed, considered by the commission in accordance with the laws. They are necessary to provide consistent and clear land use regulation and provision of public spaces in downtown. And the recommended code amendments are in the best interest of public health, safety, and welfare. So those are the conclusions putting forward. And then recommending the amendments as the code amendments as amended tonight. Any discussion around this? Not seeing any. Is there a motion to approve these recommendations as amended? Commissioner Curd.
I move to approve the recommendations in attachment 2 as amended to the Downtown Public Space Code amendments, Planning Commission findings, conclusions, and recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner Curd. Is there a second? Commissioner Bleak.
I second the motion previously discussed by Commissioner Curd.
Is there any discussion regarding this proposal as moved and seconded? Hearing none, I will ask the commissioners to vote. So all in favor, please indicate, and Commissioner Aldrich, you'll have to indicate verbally. So in favor?
Commissioner Aldrich's indicating aye.
Okay, so we have unanimous approval of the commissioners in attendance. Commissioner Curd, you have a comment?
I do. Thanks for recognizing. This is Karsten. I'd just like to recognize all the work that Dave Boyd put into this over the past year and a half. The attachments and the analyses that he's put in were really easy for me to understand, especially entering the commission last year. And so I just really want to applaud him and thank him for the clarity that he brought to this really complex and really difficult issue. So thank you so much.
And I would second Commissioner Curd's praise of Senior Planner Boyd. We talked about this a lot. I think it's been very productive and useful, so thank you. And nodding of heads in agreement. So with that, I think we're set on this item. Would the commissioners like to take a brief break before we launch into Canyon Park? Because I think this is going to be a long one. I see yes, so propose a 10-minute break. I see 7:20 on my computer. We'll be back in 10 minutes for the Canyon Park sub-area plan presentation and public comments.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
on air, reconvening the Bothell Planning Commission September 2nd, 2020 meeting. And we are moving on to the Canyon Park Sub-Area Plan Update public hearing. And I would propose that we begin with public testimony. We have a number of people who have indicated an interest in providing testimony on this plan. I'll ask you to limit your testimony to 3 minutes, and if you go over 3 minutes, I'll remind you of the limit, and we'll try to stick to that. So, Director Cotterman, who do we have up first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, I'm going to call on Michael Reed with 10W. Michael, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, 1 second. Let me see if I can pull up the video that you provided. It's always a little bit of a nail biter. Okay. Can you see the video, Mr. Chair?
I see the image, yes.
Okay. So we have the image up. I am starting the video.
There we go.
I'm starting the 3-minute timer.
All right, great, thank you. I'll just jump into a brief history and then kind of portray what you're seeing here. So we've been working with WashDOT and the city on impacts to Canyon Park from a number of fronts. This particular video is, and I might ask you to repeat it, is basically a simulation of a traffic model that we received from the Washington State Department of Transportation at the beginning of the year as part of our interaction with them. And basically it represents what the impacts and operations of specifically Canyon Park and the surrounding vicinity is going to experience as part of the express toll lane. Unfortunately, this doesn't really portray what I wanted to get you to observe, but basically if you focus in on kind of the mid to left center of the image, there is a street within the business park where the toll lane is going to access, and that is called 17th Avenue. It's a dead-end street. It, thank you. It is not that long, and it currently serves a number of businesses as well as the Park and Ride Transit Center. This particular link has been an issue and concern of the business park and myself for quite some time since we heard about these projects. And the year of opening forecast for traffic getting off this ramp with the other existing traffic, which isn't substantial, is in excess of 1,000 vehicles per hour. At build out with a sub-area plan, that number increases to 1,800 vehicles per hour. To give you an idea of what that means, is that is roughly equivalent to the current northbound demand on 527, immediately adjacent to this ramp. And you're all familiar with 527. That currently has 3 through lanes, a separate left turn lane, and a right turn lane to handle the capacity. We're concerned about the intersection capacity. We're concerned about internal to the business park. We're concerned about the fact that of the arterial capacity of 17th itself. WashDOT is only planning on building a small turn pocket, additional turn pocket at the signal for approximately 300 feet. They are making some other intersection improvements at the 527 and 220th intersection, but beyond that, that's what they're planning to do. And so the sub-area plan is going to compound an already deficient system that the state is proposing, and that's one of our primary concerns in this whole series of toll lane and the sub-area plan itself.
All right, thank you. So you're at 3 minutes. Is that your summary comment then that you close with?
Sure, I do have one more comment, but I'll cede my time to others.
All right, thank you. We have another commenter.
Yes, Mr. Chair. We have there it is. So this is Ray Liao with Van S. Feldman. And Ray, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. So I'm starting your 3-minute timer now.
All right, thank you. Good evening. My name is Ray Liao. I'm with the law firm of Van Ness Feldman, and you heard from our transportation engineer, Mike Reed, just now, and we probably should have flip-flopped, but so as it goes. We represent the Canyon Park Business Centers Owners Association, and we have submitted a letter in Mike's memo from 10W in advance of tonight's hearing, and I'd like to call your attention to that. We have been engaged in the sub-area planning process since the beginning and have been working in earnest with the city to highlight our concerns with this plan. We don't feel like our concerns have been gaining much traction, really any traction through this process, and unfortunately we still cannot support this plan in its current state. We're disappointed. We had hoped to have a joint planning session between or study session, between the Planning Commission and the Owners Association. We understand that's not going to work out for you all. But we do want to emphasize that we think that the city should be striving for the support of its stakeholders before adopting this plan. We represent a pretty huge block of those stakeholders, and we hope that you are paying attention to our concerns. We do actually believe it is possible to develop a workable sub-area plan, and we presented a roadmap for that in our most recent comment letter. I'd like to just highlight a few of those key elements from that letter that focus, quite frankly, on our #1 concern that was previewed by Mike, which is traffic congestion in and around the business park. So first, we think that the plan should show that traffic congestion will not reach ceiling levels under either the current sub-area plan or the new proposed sub-area plan. The traffic analysis that is incumbent with the proposed plan shows that without any change to the current sub-area plan regulations, State Route 527 and 524, both of those corridors, will fail concurrency within the planning horizon. We think that the sub-area plan needs to stop right there and commit to additional mitigation strategies for the current plan, or also known as the no action alternative. The city really needs to prevent these corridors from slipping below failing service levels of service, before going on to plan for additional density within the sub-area. Second, the sub-area plan should include transportation mitigation projects that are demonstrated to be feasible. We're concerned that of the few transportation mitigation projects that have been identified in this plan, there's significant environmental and other constraints that are going to preclude them from ultimately being built, further slipping concurrency into well below failing levels. We also believe the plan relies too heavily on the success of transportation demand management and transit-oriented solutions. These are great in concept, but as Mike Reed's memo points out, there are some significant flaws in that analysis that's been prepared that we think are going to preclude these programs from achieving the promised trip generation reduction rates that they propose as mitigation. And then third, the plan should focus on long-term transportation policies and projects that will improve congestion for these corridors. And this really leads to what Mike was illustrating relative to the WashDOT electronic toll lane projects, as well as cumulative impacts from Sound Transit's proposed bus space, both within the park. As Mike showed you, or tried to show you.
And your 3 minutes are up, so I'd appreciate it if you'd wrap your comments, please.
I will. So as you saw, the electronic toll lane project, it is going to back up traffic tremendously through the park. We believe the city should be working with WashDOT on a second electronic toll lane that leads to the south, away from the park, to better distribute traffic. So with that, we hope that you will pay close attention to our recommendations in our comment letter before proceeding with adopting the sub-area plan. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Vliet, do you have a question or comment?
I just have a question for the last caller. Thank you very much for calling in. And oh, yes, thank you very much for that presentation, those questions and concerns. I guess my question is, so I believe it is the Canyon Park Business Association that is being represented by the comments. I'm just wondering, So is that those are the concerns by the actual, are there people within that association that maybe don't have those concerns, or is it basically every business that is a member of your association? Thank you.
Yeah, and it's a great question. The Owners Association represents all of the property owners within the park. I actually was just out in the park touring around today. We recognize there are many businesses and tenants in the park who aren't technically represented by the Owners Association, but we do speak on behalf of the property owners. And like any association, there may be individual owners or individual tenants who may not share our opinion, but we are being asked to represent the entire business park, at least from the Owners Association's perspective.
And okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chair, we have another speaker.
All right, next commenter.
Is Tim McCarg, also with the Business Park Owners Association, or I'm sorry, with Van Ness Feldman. Tim, can you?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, Mike. I'm actually going to cede my time tonight because Ray just covered essentially everything that we have to say. So in the interest of time, please move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't have anyone else that indicated they want to speak. So I'm going to try something here. Unmuting. Oh, it just got noisy. Okay. I'm going to unmute the callers that I have not heard from. I was going to try to unmute everybody, but it got a little noisy. And it looks like we may have a question from Commissioner Gustafson while I'm doing that.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Ms. Liao. Thank you for your presentation. As a new planning commissioner, I want to understand what is the alternative that the Business Owners Association is proposing. Is it to keep the no action alternative, or is it to keep the no action alternative unless the toll lane is rerouted from the park and ride? If you could lay that out for me, the alternative proposed, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. You know, a little bit of this is a bit of a technical nuance comparing the proposed sub-area plan to the no action. We do think that at the moment, the city should stick with the no action until it's figured out how to ensure that the traffic congestion that is anticipated to occur now, should nothing happen, stay above what's considered a failing level in terms of concurrency. And that has to do with traffic delays. So we think that the sub-area plan should essentially, as you said, do nothing, not increase density within the sub-area until it ensures that first, the traffic congestion for the 2043 timeline stays above a failing concurrency level. If you can figure that out first, and it could be this electronic toll lane, a proposal that you know, we think that WashDOT and the city should explore together how to bifurcate that. Then you know, then the sub-area plan that you guys have been working in earnest on could make good sense. But we think you really got to attend to the existing traffic problems within the sub-area as it's currently planned to develop under the existing regulations.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have two other numbers. One was identified already, and that was Molly Lawrence. Molly, you had declined earlier. Are you still declining to testify?
Thank you, Director Cattleman. This is Molly. I thank you, Ray and Tim, for participating tonight. I am on vacation and just listening in. I did want to respond to the second to the last question, though, about whether we are in fact representing the whole Owners Association. I'll just note that I've been the outside counsel for the Owners Association for 20 years, which is preposterous. And we have repeatedly, over the course of the last 3 years, polled our owners to make sure that they really were aligned with the messages that we've been bringing to the Planning Commission and to the city. And universally, they have been. We have not heard anyone say to us, yes, no, please go forward with this sub-area plan. Instead, we have heard the arguments that we've been making to you. So as Ray noted, Ms. Liao noted, we obviously do not represent all of the businesses, the tenants within the park, but we do represent the owners, and we have been working with the city for about 3 years on this. And so I do feel like it's fair to say that the comments that we've been making fairly represent the concerns of the owners at large within the park about this sub-area plan. So that was what I wanted to say. Thank you, Director Catterman.
Thank you. And you got in under 3 minutes. So I have one other last try. I try to identify area code 206. The last 2 digits are 29. And have not heard from you. Would you like to speak at this public hearing? Going once. Last 2 digits, 29 of your telephone. Please speak up if you want to testify. Okay. I believe then we have no other speakers this evening, Mr. Chair. I would point out a couple of the speakers referenced some letters. Those were sent to the commission, I believe, yesterday or today. I think there were some maybe on both days. There were 3 new exhibits that you received, exhibits 12, 13, 14, and then there was an additional exhibit today, number 15. Number 12 was from Van S. Feldman, and 13 and 14 are from Roger Belanich. One was an email and the other was a letter. Both contained the same content, but they came in separately. And then the last was from David Leviton. That was today, an email that was forwarded late today. I don't know if all the commissions had a chance to see that yet, but it is exhibit number 15 and does go into the record. So, and I believe I mentioned in the staff report, we are working on compiling all of the comments that we received from those exhibits and hope to bring that summary along with basically the status of our response to those comments at the next meeting. So we're working on that. I hope to bring that to you at the next meeting, but we'll certainly bring that to you before we ask you to make a recommendation so you can talk through those issues. So with that, I believe we are done with the public hearing for this evening, but we would want to continue that to the 16th. Are you muted?
So I believe we need a motion to continue the public hearing.
I believe so, yes.
So would one of the commissioners like to move to continue the public hearing to the next commission meeting, September 16th? Commissioner Curd.
I move to continue the public hearing for the Canyon Park sub-area plan update till September 16th.
Is there a second for that motion? Commissioner Vliet.
I second the motion to continue the public hearing to September 16th.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded to continue the public hearing on the Canyon Park sub-area plan update to the next Planning Commission meeting, September 16th. All commissioners in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. And Commissioner Alderks, since I can't see your hand. All right, so we have unanimous consent to continue the public hearing to the next meeting. With that, I'd like to hear from staff. I believe you have a presentation you'd like to make for us.
We do, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. So I'm going to open up the presentation, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to introduce the staff for this evening. From our consultant team, we have Rachel Miller and Bob Bangford with Makers Architecture, as well as Lisa Greeter with Burke and Associates. Sorry about that, Lisa. And we do have a presentation for you this evening. And then I will turn it over to Rachel, if I can get the slideshow to work. Okay, Rachel?
Yes.
All yours.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mike and Chair and Commissioners. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about what we've heard in the most recent public engagement, and then talk about the planned action ordinance draft, and then the draft regulations. So if we can go to the next slide. And then going on from there. Okay, so looking at the open house results, back on August 6th, we held 2 open houses and had about 20 participants in each. And overall, people were generally there to gather information about what the plan was all about and how things might change in the area over time. And there was a lot of support for the ideas put forward. We broke out into discussion groups and smaller groups over Zoom, and that allowed for some deeper conversation in focused topic areas. So what you see on the screen is some of the major themes that came forward in those different discussion groups. And you'll see that there was a lot of support for consolidating a mix of uses or getting this kind of mini downtown going in Kenyon Park. That came out in both the land use and the urban design groups. And also improving connections to transit, and alongside that, focusing more density near transit, and then affordable homes and amenities and services was also important to folks. Next slide, please. So as we've heard throughout the project, the sticky issue is really the vehicular congestion, and we heard that again in these open houses. We did also hear a lot of support for investments in other modes, so pedestrian, bicycle, and transit. And some interest in the park and ride south of I-405, a potential future park and ride. There, in all of these groups, there, of course, were some questions about different things that were highlighted on these slides. Next slide, please. We also had a survey open for about 2 weeks as well, following that open house. So people in the open house were directed to this survey, and then it was advertised as well through the city website and other channels, listservs. And we had about 65 people responding, 64 respondents. And you also have in your packet the full results from all of these if you'd like to follow along. So interestingly, on the survey, all the recommendations were supported, and most were in the range of strongly supported. The things that came forward as the most important to people and the recommendations that they most wanted to see happen in the future was generally safe and beautiful paths. There were about 3 recommendations that related to these, and they all rose to the top. People also liked the idea of this being a long-range vision, and gathering places was also very important, so public plazas and parks. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with the open houses as well, matching growth with the appropriate transportation infrastructure, and then alongside that, amenities and services to go along with what people living and working in the area would need. There was a lot of support for extending or improving the streets and intersections, which does help the transportation corridors maintain their current level of service, and prioritizing transit was also very important to people. Next slide, please. This is a sample of the survey responses and results from those. So as you can see, those teal colors show the support for them. The darker teal is the strongly supported, and the lighter teal is support. And so you can see that these are well above half of respondents. Usually closer to 80 or 90% of people are agreeing or strongly agreeing. This is a particularly supported section on the survey that had to do with creating places that are enjoyable for people. So again, tree-lined streets, the parks and trails, gathering spaces, those kinds of recommendations were really well supported. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, everything was supported by the majority of respondents, but there were some diverging views on some recommendations, and the comments really reveal what was going on if it received a slightly lower score. Reducing parking requirements for development feasibility was a recommendation that the Subarea plan puts forward, and people are divided on that. There are comments that you can read some of these comments on the slide, but some people are very pro reducing parking minimums, and some people are against it. The idea, and I'm quoting this one because I think we learned that the wording was a little bit confusing, all transit improvements to take root before reconsidering the vision outlined in this plan. I think people were confused by the wording, but this one is one that didn't score as well. One comment mentioned that it might have more to do with having a good vision set forward that's your long range plan, but being adaptable and changing shouldn't, you should be willing to adapt and change as needed. And then protecting the business park from residential development. There were people that were for this, and it seemed like people who worked in the business park tended to support this idea of protecting it, protecting the businesses for potential residential displacement. And then there were other people that thought, why not mix the uses more? And then update development regulations to increase density near transit. This was also a little divided. Some people were very interested in this idea, and others, I think, were just not interested in greater density. Next slide, please. So the most controversial topic on the survey was about the parking reductions. And so we're going to talk about this more later in the evening, but I just wanted to bring this up so that you have some background on it. Half of the people who responded to the survey either agreed or strongly agreed with reducing parking requirements. However, the comments, and this was the lowest scoring recommendation that we asked about on the survey. And so some of the things that people were concerned about were that the current transit service and ways of getting to transit and the idea of shifting to other modes is not currently adequate to really support that many people using other modes. And then the impact to existing street parking. And this is a concern we've heard before as well, where residential uses or near residences, there's sometimes more people parking on the street than what people are accustomed to. And then other comments are suggesting that reducing parking minimums is a good thing for supporting market-driven development. And then there were a few comments as well on setting maximums. And this really helps to support the transportation demand management or reducing commute trips. And so people recognized that on the survey and commented on that setting maximums would actually be something they were interested in. So later tonight, we will talk about parking. And I just wanted to point out, while I still have the floor, that the draft regulations that Bob will talk about do reduce the amount of required parking. And then the draft sub-area plan has a recommendation about studying the feasibility of parking maximums. So we'll be asking you what you think about those ideas. And while we consider them, some of the things to keep in mind are that reducing parking reduces the cost of development, so it makes it more feasible, and thereby can be connected to affordable housing requirements that we'll talk about later. And it is quite effective. It's a great tool at reducing commutes. And then it also has benefit to the human experience of walking around. Less surface lots and structured lots allow for more stimulation and human scale design. And then it is dependent, though, on viable alternate modes. Otherwise, it gets a little sticky. Okay, I will stop there.
So, commissioners, any questions or comments on the presentation thus far? Looking across, not seeing any questions. So I guess, Rachel, you can continue onward.
And so this is off to Lisa.
Good evening. I'm here to talk about the planned action ordinance. And this slide here goes over the purpose that was stated in the draft EIS. Planned actions have been around since the mid-90s, and the city has had one since 2008 in the downtown. But the purpose of them is to do more environmental homework up front at this area-wide planning stage rather than at the project permit review stage. And it streamlines the environmental review for proposals that are meeting the performance standards, and we'll talk about what those are. But we're somewhere in the middle of the diagram on the right. Prepare and issue the environmental impact statement, then consider adoption of a planned action ordinance that defines those performance standards, and then if adopted, then you review the future permits for consistency. So we can go to the next slide. So here are the key features in the draft that's in your packet. The ordinance defines where in the geography, would a planned action be considered, and we're proposing the whole sub area. While most of the growth is in the regional growth center, there are some areas of growth that were part of the cumulative review, as well as some of the infrastructure improvements. The ordinance states what would be a qualifying land use, and it lists out what those are, and those are generally the categories of land use that you've been seeing in your presentations around the sub-area plan. So the mixed use and employment uses, as well as public services and infrastructure that have been identified in the plan. We also set a threshold for development, which is how much growth would be covered by the analysis and the mitigation, and that would be the preferred alternative dwellings and jobs. And then there's a bank of trips for the PM peak hour related to the preferred alternative, and a requirement to follow concurrency. So basically someone would come in and the city would confirm they're in the planned action area, that they have the land uses they're proposing are covered by the ordinance, that the total number of jobs and dwellings is not exceeded, and that the trips that we've evaluated are also not exceeded. And then there's a review criteria the staff would go through to approve individual planned action projects. There is also a monitoring and review section of the ordinance. So that's the major components. And then on the next slide, we identify that we also have some materials in the ordinance that we're allowed to include, including the application form and the custom SEPA checklist that's tailored to the EIS. And then importantly, drawn from the EIS are the mitigation measures. And you'll see that compared to the draft EIS, some of the shoulds or coulds are turned into shalls. And the mitigation document covers all the environmental impact statement topics. So the natural environment, land use, transportation, public services, and utilities. So I thought we'd cover just a couple of the sections on mitigation. First one on transportation. So you'll see in Exhibit B3 of the Planned Action Ordinance, we list in more detail what are the requirements that an individual planned action would need to meet. What they'd need to provide frontage improvements consistent with the sub-area plan cross sections and requirements. For those in the business park, they would need to identify a letter of transportation adequacy. For the improvement fees, that's basically the city's impact fees, but the city can require a proportionate share if the improvements are not yet fully in the city's fee schedule. And then there's transportation demand management. So we have a chart in the draft ordinance that identifies under parking, transit, sharing, etc., what are the kinds of things the city could condition a development. So an overall site plan and development, or if it's in the future, a change of use, what could the city require of a future business? There's also a requirement to pay a proportionate share of adding the non-motorized and transit improvements, and to conduct a right-size parking analysis. The mitigation would also allow for a fee in lieu if somebody wants to pay instead of making their frontage improvements or some other kind of improvement, so that the city could make the improvements all at one time. That is an option as well. And the new transportation improvements or other infrastructure could take advantage of the analysis on ecological mitigation opportunities. So that's transportation. And then on the next slide, we have stormwater. So you'll see there's mitigation there that follows from the draft EIS to protect streams and downstream stormwater infrastructure, such as implementing systems to detain or treat runoff before being released into creeks. And the city would apply its stormwater management manual, but require more stringent requirements under that umbrella to make sure there's, to lessen demand on stormwater infrastructure. You'll see there's quite a bit of attention paid to regional facilities too, and encouraging that as an option. And development could either do the improvements on their site or pay a fee equivalent to that to pay into improving a regional facility. And there's also mitigation oriented around regional water quality treatment. So that's an overview of the planned action ordinance. And I think, Rachel, you were posing based on the input on the plan and the necessity of TDM and wanting to reduce parking, this question here.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And Steve, are you on the call, Steve? Steve was going to give a little background on the relationship between parking and TDM as well.
So, as mentioned before, when we talked at another study session, I think city staff is emphasizing the importance of transportation demand management or demand management, TDM. We envision something like the city applying for grants as they become available, subsidizing a match to hire a position or two of to start the program and try to create a self-sustaining program. And that's very important for us because as we talked about, it's getting more and more difficult to build bigger and bigger vehicular capacity roadways. And there have been success stories in TDM programs in reducing the amount of single occupancy vehicle trips and getting people into non-motorized or transit alternatives. The goal is to give the commuters more choice. We envision this would probably cost something on the order of $250,000 a year in the beginning, and it would likely fund a position or two, not necessarily in the city. It could be a consultant, which would give more objectivity to trying to facilitate between transit, businesses, residences, property owners, and the city in this TDM program. It could take several years once we get funding for this thing to kind of take hold and get off the ground, because that person would essentially have to get everybody together, get everybody on the same page, get everybody agreeing on how we're going to approach this, which Rachel then came up with several potential alternatives. We have heard from TDM experts that a key component of the plan is to ensure the success of the program is placing parking maximums. If there's just too much parking, and it's somewhat of a balancing act. So if there's too much parking, TDM won't be effective. If there's too little bit, you may hinder development. So staff, again, is recommending that we explore setting maximums. We are not ready to set maximums now. We would like to do more homework to make sure we get the right balance so we get the benefit of both sides. And the question would be whether you would support exploring this. And the reason for it would be if you support TDM and you think it's critical for the success of TDM. Thanks.
Okay, so commissioners, questions or comments on the presentation thus far?
Jenny Aldrich seeking to be recognized.
Yes, Commissioner Aldrich.
Thank you. This is a question for, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time keeping track of names. Is it Lee? No. For the report on environmental impact, are there any other environmental costs like stormwater treatment that the city would like developers to take responsibility for through other additional fees or like on-site actions that have not been included in this plan? And are there other types of situations that might apply in this sub area?
So this is Lisa Greeter. I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about what topics you're thinking about in the plan. We're starting from a basis of the current city regulations, so there's a number of things already required in code, like impact fees for various facilities. The draft code, I think Rachel gets at on-site open space, some of the things that are identified in the plan. So there are other responsibilities that development would have to comply with in terms of code requirements. So what we're trying to do with the planned action is cover things that are not already in code or in the draft code, but are related to the environmental impact. So we've focused on sort of the arenas that are more around the natural environment, and then infrastructure elements that the SEPA mitigation is a way to implement that makes sense and implements the policies of the plan that are not necessarily in a zoning code, I guess.
Yeah, and later, if I could add to that.
Please do.
We will be talking later tonight about incentives. And one of the things that could be incentivized is energy efficiency, wastewater work within buildings and on sites.
May I respond?
Commissioner Aldrich.
Thank you. Jenny Aldrich here. I'm specifically wondering about things like air quality, carbon off-put from certain sites. Those I do not believe are currently written into Bothell code. Are those topics that might be addressed in the sub-area plan, or that city planners would like to address at some point?
Well, I guess in a couple of respects it's been addressed. So from a land use compatibility perspective, that 500-foot buffer from the center line of the freeway is meant to ensure that future residential development is located in a manner that doesn't expose the residents to negative air quality. And also some of the requirements around low impact development and green infrastructure are related to also improving air quality. And that was based on some of the evaluation in the EIS. In terms of greenhouse gas reduction, I think there's an analysis in the draft about the alternatives effect on greenhouse gas and generally putting people close to jobs and services is a way to address that. And Rachel, I suppose energy conservation that you were just speaking to is another way to get at some of the built environment emissions.
And just from a staff standpoint, this is Mike Cotterman. This is an issue that has come up in the past. We've had discussions with council about putting items on the docket. As Lisa mentioned, there is nothing in the code right now that addresses this, but it is something that we do look at through SEPA. And Lisa, maybe you could talk a little bit about what SEPA just generally requires in terms of air quality analysis, because I know that's one of the factors. And as you mentioned, it was analyzed in the EIS for this sub-area plan.
Right. So under SEPA, we addressed air quality in relation to transportation emissions and then in relation to compatibility. And under SEPA, the city can apply mitigation that isn't in a code, so that if there's a gap in the code. So this is where we've kind of built into the sub-area plan some of those requirements. So we basically made it a part of the proposal to limit the locations where residential can go along some of the congested streets, to require more greening in the area. And Mike, also to, I think, locate uses in closest proximity to the transit investments, and to mix the uses. All of that has been designed as part of the proposal to reduce those impacts, to kind of fill that gap in the code, and to kind of design it that way from the beginning. But if there are some questions around what else the city could do in relation to the draft code that Rachel and Bob would present, maybe that's an area where we can look more closely at what we're proposing, Rachel, and if there's some ways in which we can tweak that.
Yeah, when we have Bob presenting on the draft regulations, we can maybe touch back on that.
Okay, Commissioner Gustafson.
Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you, Lisa, for explaining that this plan action ordinance would include things that are not already included in code. So I just wanted to clarify, it sounds like the issue of buffer widths and the issue of general mitigation, whether it happens on-site or off-site, would be addressed in other documents.
The city's critical area regulations would be the place to start. Because the status of the code updates for wetlands was still in parallel with this process, we put in something from the draft EIS that the city could condition development to be consistent with the best available science the city was planning to incorporate in its pending wetland regulations. So it gives the city the ability to consider that with the proposals.
Okay, other commissioner comments, questions? Hearing none, if we could proceed. Oh, Commissioner Curd, did I see a thought of a question?
I guess so. Thank you. This is Karsten Kurd. I wanted to respond, if just briefly, to Steve's point about pursuing TDM and parking maximums. I think that's really probably what I had envisioned at the start of these conversations about transportation, is having a dedicated staff or consultant long-term start to manage some of the strategies that are implemented and come up with recommendations. I think it's worked well in other jurisdictions that it's been applied, and I am in general approval of that. Thanks.
Okay, anyone else? Then I think we'll proceed with the presentations. Oh, did I see Commissioner Gustafson? Did you see? Oh, okay.
Yes, this is Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you. I support the TDM program. However, I find the arguments of the Canyon Park Business Owners Association pretty convincing here, that the TDM is not going to be enough to mitigate the traffic. It is making me very uneasy. I think I would take a different tack than has been discussed. I think the overall transportation network, including biking and pedestrian, needs a lot more work if we really, really want people to use it. I think a position is not going to be enough, although that will help. I've read some of the comments that came in, and personally, having tried to bike from Bothell to Thrasher's Corner, I've seen a lot of things that might need to be added, specific things that might need to be added to the plan, at least on the biking front, to make it more feasible to bike there, because at the present moment, I do not think that even with a TDM plan, we're going to manage to move people out of cars and into alternative forms of transportation. I don't know when we're going to discuss this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is Karsten. Just to piggyback off of Commissioner Gustafson's comment, we're still waiting on hearing back from the city on the bike master plan for the whole city. And that's been something that this commission has had their eyes set on as a priority. And so I'm wondering maybe if we could get an update on the status of that sometime as it specifically relates to Canyon Park. Thanks.
So, Director Cotterman, could you take note of that?
Yes, that's noted. I know that because of other priorities and things, that they've not been able to get back to that, but I believe it is being worked on. And I don't know if, Steve, if you're still on, if you can speak to that at all. We still have Steve.
Don't see him jumping in.
Yeah. So
Here it is.
can you hear me? Yes. Yes, the bike plan has taken us longer than we had hoped. We have one transportation planner in our city, and we have Sound Transit trying to come through, I-405 express tolling coming through, Canyon Park Subarea plan going through, and we have a bike plan that we're trying to update. So it's been very challenging. COVID did not help us at all. We are making some progress. The group, the consultants, and Bruce Blackburn talked extensively with our transportation planner, Sherman Gahn, while they were developing the system for the bikes through the Subarea so that it aligns with the ultimate bike plan, even though it's still in draft form. I will take note that you guys want an update on that. And I think we can provide where we are at this point, a snapshot at least.
Thank you, Steve.
Chair, would you mind if I add a little bit?
Go right ahead.
What would be really helpful also, I will note what Steve said, that we did work closely with staff in Bothell, Sherman in particular, and making sure that we were in sync with the draft bike plan, PED bike plan. And our understanding is that the proposals put forward in this Subarea plan will also be melded back into the bike master plan. What would really help us is a specific and close look at the Canyon Park pedestrian bicycle plan on page 105 of the draft plan. It would be helpful to understand precisely what more is needed.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Just to kick off the discussion while I look for that page, I'm pretty sure I know what page that is. I would say wayfinding, signage, and storage are 3 things that need to be added.
Okay. Other commissioner comments? Commissioner Gustafson.
Since no one else is chiming in, I'm going to also mention perhaps traffic calming measures on large intersections with 527. For example, at Thrasher's Corner, it is a very difficult transition from the beautiful North Creek Trail to the very auto-oriented space there. And I think there are other areas along 527 that could use traffic calming measures consideration there. More to come. I can stop whenever you would like me to. I think there might be some need to also consider wayfinding, not just within Canyon Park, but from Canyon Park to other places like downtown Bothell. What are the pedestrian connections? What are the bike connections? Can somebody from outside Canyon Park navigate their way into Canyon Park? There are specific road connections and maintenance as well that I think would be part of the bike plan to figure out how someone could, for example, get from the Hindu temple perhaps to the stores and shops in Thrasher's Corner. just as an example. But those are some specific ideas I have.
Thank you. We do have an action about including wayfinding for pedestrian and bicycle routes, but we don't have a wayfinding plan. So I think that's the key aspect you're looking for in that regard.
Okay, Commissioner Curd? I saw you wave your card.
Yeah, that was my question, but thank you. I guess I totally am on board with all the things that Commissioner Gustafson just said. I echo 100% of them. I'd also add maintenance areas for bikes, whether that's facilities like are employed in Bellingham along major bike routes where the city has installed posts with bike tools and a pump or something just to get people to the next the next spot if they've got a flat. Also areas like along the Burke-Gilman Trail, there are several bike shops. That's something that's infrastructure that would help. So maybe that's not something that we can necessarily plan for, but we can sort of encourage. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Gustafson.
Yeah, thank you so much for recognizing me again. I think there are 3 small words here, which are bike parking minimums. Let's have safe storage so people can safeguard their investments.
Okay. Any other commissioner comments or questions before we turn back to presentation?
Jenny Aldrich seeking to be recognized.
Yes, Commissioner Aldrich.
All right, since my video is not working, you cannot see me nodding my head. So I thought I might come on and say yes to the suggestion that we get an update to the bike plan so that we can better understand how Canyon Park can be accessed for bikes and pedestrians, and what kind of, where the comprehensive plan for biking is at for the city. So thank you very much for being willing to do that, and for my fellow commissioners for bringing up this point of discussion.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Aldrich. Other commissioner comments, questions? Okay, let's proceed with the presentation then.
Great. Good evening, commissioners and chair. So I'm sure you've all had a chance to at least browse some of the regulations. There's a lot of material there, but we're going to zoom in on some of the key questions here that were mentioned in the memo. So the big ones center around should additional height and or FAR be used to incentivize other objectives, including affordable housing and solar collectors and many other elements, and how much capacity should be set aside for height or FAR bonuses. So I'll go into this a little bit. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a snapshot of the proposed or the draft density and dimensional standards chart. But before getting in the details, I wanted to give a little bit of overview on the next slide. So the overall approach here, again, is recognizing the modest increase in development capacity via the reducing the parking minimums, which I'll get into in a minute, as well as leveraging some of the regional transit investment and local city investment, a wide variety, and increasing allowed building heights. And there's an asterisk because that varies depending on the area, and it might vary depending on our approach. And in some zones where you have to do mixed use to get up to the taller heights, for instance. So the approach is really just a couple options here on how to capture that increase. And the one that's in your draft regulations is number 1 here, and that is to develop floor area and or height-based incentives to encourage affordable housing and potentially other community amenity features. And then there's another one that I'll talk about, creating mandatory affordable housing program. Let's go to the next slide. which is will be your option 1, which is again the draft that you have in front of you. And so you'll recognize there that we had a minimum density crossed out and a minimum floor area ratio, first of all. And we simplified it to just minimum floor area ratio. And that is set largely just to prohibit single-story uses served by surface parking. Now, if everybody developed their property in that manner, we wouldn't be meeting our growth targets, but the market's just not going to work that way. But what it does do is it allows for a bit of variety and provides a floor. Now, the main thing here I wanted to mention as far as option 1, we include this maximum base floor area ratio. So that's the highest you can go without doing these bonus incentive features. And so it's probably set just a little bit below what market development now can provide based on the current setbacks and landscaping requirements, but most particularly your building height standards. But when you factor in the reduced parking requirements and, like I said, the other infrastructure type improvements, well, the FAR numbers here are probably more closer to the current zoning capacity. The other thing you notice is there's a maximum base building height of 65 feet in most of the zones, and that lines up with most of the current maximums. And we look at increasing, having a bonus incentive of going up to 85, which allows other options for bonus incentives. So let's go to the next slide. This a little bit, we really wanted to be able to dive into this and tell you how we determine these max base floor area ratios. And I'll have Rachel kick this off first here. You actually, no, go back to the last slide and let Rachel speak to it. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. So many of you may remember way back when we were
Can't hear Rachel. Can you?
Can you all hear me?
I hear
Can
you.
you all hear me? Okay.
I can hear you.
Thanks. So you might remember way back when all we were talking about was meeting the PSRC Regional Growth Center criteria and that 45 activity units per acre. That requirement has been the challenge all along. And the way we went about it was figuring out feasible development types and setting up a few typologies of building types. You might even remember those game pieces that we used at community workshops and then among staff as well. And figuring out what places, given the regional investment in transit and potential future local city investment, and knowing that the area would improve or could improve over time and become a more mixed use type of environment, we set those building types or typologies out along the map and tried to see where and how we could meet that 45 people per acre requirement. So the original FARs came from those feasible development types. And what you see on this model is that the target FARs that we were looking at the time, if about a quarter of the regional growth center redevelops approximately where you see all those colored buildings at the target FARs that we studied, this is about what you would see. And then as we went back and started translating that into regulations, we also looked at the minimum FAR, the base density, and the starting point for that was saying, okay, if the top feasible or the most dense feasible development type is such and such, then the next dense one, let's bump the minimum FAR down to the next one. And then they have been edited since then for further feasibility and other reasons. So Bob, does that give you enough of a background on that?
Thanks, Rachel. So what we wanted to do was to zoom in to 2 sites here, and this also helps you understand what these FARs look like. So let's go to the next slide. We'll zoom in. Although first I want to explain how we're calculating or how we're proposing to calculate the FAR. So it includes floor area that's above ground but excludes structured parking divided by the entire lot or site area. So that includes the building and your setbacks, and also these through block connections, at least that are on the lot. But they exclude any critical areas or buffers and stormwater ponds that may be on that particular site. So those would be excluded from the FARs. So let's go to the next slide. So we zoomed into this site's right on 17th, between there and the creek, and you can see the subdivision just to the south. So there's 4 buildings on this site. We had a confusing spreadsheet on earlier that we spared you from to just zoom in on where we ended up with. So this, I thought it would end up being is kind of like a 2.5 floor area ratio, but after taking out the some of the open space on the upper right-hand corner of the graphic, as well as all the through block connections, and there's actually more than are actually required there. It ended up, despite being 6-story buildings, only a 1.72 floor area ratio. And technically it would be even less because I think there's going to be some structured parking above ground. So it's probably going to be more like 1.4 or 1.5 after you take that out. But maybe after developing something a little more intensively and not including those all these extra through block connections, you might get back closer to 2 or 1.7. And what we came up with is the base max FAR in this MU high zone is 2.0. But I think the next site might be a better illustration, because here we just zoom in on one building. And so this is to the north. It's what's referred to as the TIAA site. So we just zoomed in. This building 3 is kind of a smaller lot. It doesn't include that stormwater pond to the north of it, but it does include at least half of the through block connections and street around it and setbacks. So this came out, even though it's 6-story buildings, it comes out to a 2.0 FAR after taking out the courtyard and again, the half of the through block connections and the setbacks. And also taking out mostly the ground floor is structured parking. So it comes out to 2.0, but in this case, it's in the MU medium zone where our draft chart has a 1.5. So they would need to do one of the bonus incentives to be able to get back up to 2, up to this area. So let's go to the next slide. So there's another option here to do it a little differently, and we've with Dave and Mike and Rachel, we had some pretty good discussions about this. So one is looking at having mandatory affordable housing requirements, but to do that we would need to tweak the chart a little bit. And these are my suggestions that was running by the team here. And so it would be, what we would do here would be, we just increase the building height, and you can either go to 75, or talking to the building official, you could go to 85, which allows for 5/3 or 5 wood over 3 podium concrete. So that would be an increase in capacity that you could capture there. But then what we show also is increasing the maximum base FAR a little bit more. So what this would do is, again, it would require some amount of affordable housing with all the development, and then you would take these increased FARs and you could still, if to get over, for instance, 2.5 FAR in the RMU high zone, you would have to do one of the other bonus incentives, whether it's a TDR provision or more intensive affordable housing, or if it's for mixed use or any of those other items. So there's a couple different approaches here, and I'm trying to remember what the next slide is. If maybe we cut the questions after that, I can't remember. Let's go to the next slide.
We had a little light blackout for a minute, so give us a minute to catch up. Next slide.
Oh, okay. So the last thing on here was, again, this was in your memo, and it was really, no matter which of these systems we use, there is an opportunity for these other incentives aside from affordable housing, the things that you had talked about were affordable commercial space, dedication of public space, green buildings, green stormwater infrastructure, other public amenities, and transfer development rights, which I understand is a big deal for the Sound Transit site. And are there other incentives that should be considered? Now, I think that's the last slide before the question slide. Yes. So.
Okay, so let's back up then and see those questions. Oop, there we go. So, commissioners, would you like to weigh in on these potential incentives?
Jenny Aldrich seeking to be recognized.
Yes, Commissioner Aldrich.
Thank you. Thanks so much for this this list of incentives here. And one, it sort of relates to my previous question to Lisa about especially carbon-based businesses. So I get this wouldn't necessarily be about development, but it would be about the businesses that might come into these spaces. So, for example, if we had a refrigeration company come in, and we know that refrigeration is actually one of the largest sources of carbon being off-gassed into the environment, would there be some kind of an incentive to mitigate their carbon offloading that could be done here? And am I completely wrong? And this is only talking about development and not about business.
I'll start response to that one and let others jump in. This is Mike Cotterman. It's a great question, and I haven't really thought of it being posed that way before. So generally, we would address something like that through the individual SIPA review. And I don't know in this case for a specific use. Typically, it's more about the building. We're dealing with the land use from more of the development standpoint and not the individual use in the building, other than indicating what is and isn't allowed. So I don't know. I'm gonna put Lisa on the spot here. Would there be the possibility that if we had something like what Commissioner Aldrich is describing, that we would require maybe some additional analysis and or mitigation to go with that, even though they might be under the planned action umbrella?
Could we get some examples of what those businesses are?
She mentioned a refrigeration business.
Oh, refrigeration. Oh, I see.
So where part of their process, their manufacturing process, for example, may involve release of gases or the things that have an environmental impact.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd have to find out a little more about the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, because they regulate emissions from specific industries. So I would need to kind of do a little bit more research on that. I guess if there are types of businesses that that the city would like to see more of, and others you'd like to see less of, it seems to me like the land use code is a way to get there, right? The land use allowances is a way, like conditionally allowing some uses that if you think that they need to present more information through the conditional use process or something like that. But,
so is the question whether a business coming in had impacts greater than the kind of baseline assumed in the plan, that would be addressed another way? Is that, am I understanding that, Commissioner Aldrich?
I am just like you and some of the other commissioners who are still new here. I'm learning how this works, and my question is: are regulations or like mitigation efforts? And I don't know the correct terms on these things, so I'm doing the best I can. And thank you for your patience as I learn. But are those the kinds of businesses that we would address here in this plan Or is there another mechanism built into like Bothell Municipal Code that we would address the companies and their environmental impact that their like manufacturing process or production process has on the environment?
So there's about 3 questions in there. Let me see if I can answer them. The one has to do with more to do with the building. What we regulate in the land use code is the use itself, the activity, to a certain degree. There are some things about that, though, that we do not regulate at the local level. So we regulate things like building height and setbacks and parking and landscaping. And we also have, by state statute, we have the ability to regulate critical areas and those types of things. We don't get into the specific regulation of processes that happen in that building. Typically, what we do regulate, however, through the fire code are storage and things like that of hazardous materials or those types of things. Also through the building code to some extent. But as far as any air quality impacts, I think Lisa hit it on the head with the Puget Sound air quality. I always forget their
Clean Air
Puget Sound
Agency.
Clean Air.
Agency. Thank you. I knew there were 2 A's in there somewhere. They tend to do more of the overall regulation of those types of things. I don't know if they regulate specific businesses, so we'd have to look into that. But we can regulate green building development. So the construction of the building, the use of the materials, the HVAC. We can build in incentives, and that's what we're talking about here with some of the examples. So it's not getting specifically at what you're asking about, Commissioner Alders, but it's a way that where we do have some tools to address air quality from a building use and development standpoint. I don't know if that helps, but that's my understanding of what we can and can't do right now through our local code.
So Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Gustafson here. I also, as a new commissioner, do have some technical questions and then some more substantive questions. My technical question is, I see the discussion of both FAR maximums and height maximums. I do not understand why you would need both. Wouldn't one just work as well as the other and make it simpler to remove one?
I could take a stab at that. Well, you don't have to have both. You can, in this case, including both might give you more tools to be able to use these bonus incentives. So, if you just have building heights, I guess including floor area ratio is also a way to control the overall amount of bulk. And in this case, it would be activity units or units in general. So you could have a really tall, skinny building, or you could have a tall, really wide building, and that wide building is going to have a bigger floor area amount. So there's similar tools, but the FAR regulates the overall bulk. So and in this case, again, by having 2 maximums or base maximums, it allows us some extra options to use the incentive system to get some of these other amenities that we might want. Hopefully that helps answer that a little bit.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Yes, Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you, Bob. That's very clear on the bulk issue. I would like to launch into some of the substantive questions about the priorities. I have 2 questions. First, it seems that mandatory affordable housing is what we are aiming for with our equity goals. However, I would like to know if perhaps there are unintended consequences. Perhaps the incentive system could create more affordable housing in the end. I feel like that's something we might want to bring the gentleman from Arch to talk to us about, since he offered. And my second point is that there's a list of incentives. All of them sound great, I think it's really impossible for us planning commissioners with our limited experiences to be able to rank those. This is where we need to have the equity framework that I've discussed and that other commissioners have discussed here before, the outreach, and also a system of analysis for figuring out whether the impacts are going to disproportionately affect people living in the area, especially people of color and recent immigrants. Without that outreach and that analysis on these issues, I don't think we can come to a conclusion. I would say, yes, affordable housing, but perhaps what is most needed is affordable commercial space. Without that outreach, I don't see how we can make a solid recommendation. Thank you.
And if I could respond to that, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
That's Mike Cotterman. So I appreciate the question, and I think that always more work and analysis that can be done. What we're asking for from the commission, though, is not, excuse me, not to make a decision about these, but to tell us if there are certain ones that you think are a higher priority, just from your own experience, your place as a member of the community. We won't be able to do all of these. We recognize that now. We're not even sure if we'll be able to do mandatory affordable housing. We are working with Mike Stanger at Arch to analyze those things to see what may and may not work as far as the different types of incentives, the amount of affordable housing that we might be able to require, or how we would incentivize that. So what we're looking for at this point is really just some direction in terms of what, if there are things that you think are more important, then we'd like to know that as we try to build an incentive system. We're going to try to do both of mandatory and incentive, but we don't know if we're going to be able to do that yet. So that's part of it. And to your second point about the equity lens, as you and I have discussed, I think that's something that we need to do going forward in terms of implementation, but we're not able to do that right now as part of this plan. So this doesn't lock anything in stone. It just means that this is the direction that we're headed, and we do that work as we move forward, and make sure that we're incorporating that type of lens when we do work to actually develop that implementation. So a plan is a dynamic document. It's not, it's not, this is what it is, and it's never going to change. So I would just offer that up as well for the commission's consideration.
And I see Commissioner Vliet there, but I do want to do a time check. We have about 4 minutes left in the scheduled meeting. So clearly there's a lot more to discuss here. Certainly take another question or two, and I think we may have a few administrative issues at the end. But should we entertain a motion to extend a few minutes?
Probably a good idea at this point. Yes, my intent was, we had hoped to get through everything tonight, but I honestly didn't expect that we would get through everything tonight. So I thought if we could get as far as possible, we'll come back on the 16th and we'll continue the discussion. But yes, we probably do need maybe another 5 or 10 minutes beyond 9 o'clock just to wrap things up.
So I'd ask if, Commissioner Vliet, I will recognize you in a minute, but I'd like to get this. I'd like to see if we have a motion to extend the meeting for 10 minutes till 9:10. Commissioner Vliet.
Motion to extend the meeting until 9:10.
Commissioner Curd.
I second the motion on the table.
Okay, so all in favor of extending the meeting 10 minutes so we can bring things to a reasonable point here?
Commissioner Aldrich says aye.
Okay, I believe we have unanimous consent to extend the meeting for 10 minutes. So Commissioner Vliet, I believe you wanted to comment prior to our extension.
Yes, with regards to Bob's presentation, my hopes would be to prioritize solar PV and car charging stations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Curd.
Thanks, this is Karsten. First, I want to respond to the second question, which is, I definitely think that we need to be prioritizing mandatory affordable housing rather than incentivizing it. I was at a presentation with Bruce Blackburn for the APA or something a while ago. And there was actually a discussion between the cities of Redmond and Bellevue on their approaches. Bellevue only incentivized, Redmond made it a requirement, and Redmond has reaped hundreds and hundreds of affordable housing units over the past couple of decades, whereas Bellevue has not had as much success. And so I think there's a regional precedent already for making affordable housing more mandatory rather than incentivizing something that's so critical to our community's success. In terms of ranking incentives, the community has expressed extreme interest in public spaces and natural areas. And so I would just echo the comments that we've received thus far, talking about making community gathering spots and preserving the existing natural areas in Canyon Park. Thanks.
Okay. Other commissioner comments? Recognizing we will be spending more time on this.
Jenny Aldrich's seeking to be recognized.
Yes, Commissioner Aldrichs.
Could we get that slide back up with the list, please? If it's possible, I will talk until that happens. So for myself, I would like to emphasize the necessity of making sure that there is affordable commercial space for our residents. I'm particularly concerned about many of the small businesses and family-owned businesses up in Thrasher's Corner, that as we price them out, we will lose some of the rich diversity of shops and services that are available up there. And so that to me is a big equity piece when it comes to this plan. And I want to make sure that that is a priority. And I would like to echo what Commissioner Curd said about requirements for affordable housing. I personally like all of these. And so, but those are kind of my two top priorities, followed by the people-powered transportation, bike, scooters, vehicle charging for green vehicles. So it's my 2 cents.
And I'd like to thank you, Commissioner Aldrichs. I'd like to point the commissioners to page 2 of Director Cotterman's memo on this, and it does have that list if you want to review it between this meeting and the next one to give a little more consideration and discussion, so that information is there. Any other thoughts on this before we wrap this item for now and come back to it in 2 weeks?
Excuse me, Bob, was there anything you wanted to add at this point?
I don't think so, other than there's some other slides we didn't get to, so we can cover those at the next meeting.
Okay.
All right, so we have the motion to continue the public hearing. Do we need an action on this item?
No, there's no other action on this at this time.
Okay, so we will be revisiting this in 2 weeks, and thank you all for your attention and excellent comments on this. So with that,
I believe
we do not have a
Curd had a card up.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Curd.
Thank you. Sorry to get one last comment in edgewise, but one of the priorities listed here is transfer of development rights, and this is something that the commission really looked into even before I was on the commission. And so with the turnover in commissioners, I feel like it might warrant maybe a little bit of background on it. And maybe we don't need to spend time on it now, but I'm looking for any resources that we can maybe look into, or previous meetings that have gone over this and we could look up on YouTube. If those exist, it would be great to get an email with just basic resources that we can look into. Thanks.
I will look into
help
that.
Educate us on.
Yeah, and see what information I can find for you. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. So moving back to the agenda, there is no study session tonight. Old business, did you want to mention the meeting before the council, Director Cotterman, or the ordinance before the council?
I'm sorry, which particular ordinance? I have several ordinances.
Yeah, the one about the housing that's going to be heard next week.
Yes, so that's the an ordinance, and I was going to bring that up under reports from staff, but I'm happy to do it here as well.
Oh, okay.
So that is the latest recommendation from the commission. I believe you finished up in July, and that has been forwarded to the council. We have a public hearing with the council next week. Dave Boyd will be presenting that, and we're asking the council to take action that night. That is specific. Well, it applies in several areas, but that was initiated in part to address some needs of the affordable housing project on Parcel A. One of the reasons I wanted to bring it up this evening for the Planning Commission was to let you know that, you recall, when you made your recommendation, you increased the distance from a quarter mile to a half mile for market rate and also for the low and very low income affordable housing. After the meeting, we had some additional discussion with Mike Stanger with Arch, and we realized we may be giving up an opportunity for mandatory affordability by increasing the distance from a quarter to a half mile for market rate housing. So we would like an opportunity to take a little time to study that before we put that into code, because once we give it away, we can't take it back. So the staff is taking the Planning Commission's recommendation, but we're also making a recommendation that at this time that we only allow the quarter mile distance on just the market rate, so that we can take a little closer look at that and determine whether or not we can get some affordable housing benefit out of that. So I wanted to make the commission aware of that. And again, this is something that came up after the meeting last time after your recommendation. So we'll let you know what happens with that, but that will be the recommendation from staff next week. And I think Dave is still on. Was there anything you'd like to add to that?
I see his name. I don't see his picture.
Yeah. Oh, he may have. Well, he'd called in. Wait, let me unmute you. Okay, Dave, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. I had to remember what number you were. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, and I know that Chair Kiernan is not available to represent Planning Commission at that meeting. So if there is another commissioner that would be able to attend in case there are any questions for Planning Commission regarding the Planning Commission.
I believe that falls first to the Vice Chair.
If available. I apologize. I've got a critical issue I need to attend to that night. Commissioner Curry.
Thanks. This is Karsten. What night is that meeting on? Is it
next Tuesday, the 8th? Yes.
I can commit to be there.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
And there may not be any questions, but it's just helpful in case there are any questions, particularly since we're recommending something a little bit different. They may want to know more about the discussion that the commission had around that. So thank you for doing that. So that's all I would have under old business, and then just one other thing under staff reports. And I think I mentioned this before, but I just want to make sure that everyone's aware. The council will be honoring Bruce Blackburn at their September 15th meeting. If you would like to tune in for that, there's a proclamation that they'll be reading and honoring him. And that may be the other person who's not identifying himself this evening. Now that I think about it, it wouldn't surprise me if Bruce had tuned in.
He might be lurking, huh?
That's his full-time job now, is lurking. So, and I believe that's all I had this evening, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, and again, thank you, Commission, for all of your comments and feedback. I feel like we're making some good progress on this. And thanks to our consultant team and also Steve Morikawa for helping us out tonight. We still got a little further to go, and I did lay out the schedule, so I won't go into that unless anybody has any questions.
Okay, Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, in the next meeting, will there be a forum to discuss general issues that were not specifically touched on here? For example, the executive summary principles of the Canyon Park Subarea plan.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, if there's any of the issues that we've touched upon, if you have others that we have not touched upon, that you want to bring to the attention of the commission, we'd like to get those wrapped up in the next couple of meetings so that we can formulate your recommendation to the council. And that can take the form of proposing changes to the plan itself. If you have a specific recommendation, then that's helpful to know what that is before we prepare a final draft that we bring to you when you're ready to make a recommendation. So we're going to be asking you for that direction. If there's anything you want to change in the plan, the draft plan or the draft regulations or the planned action ordinance for that matter, all three go to the council for action, and you'll be making a recommendation on each of those. Does that answer your question?
So I see about 1 more minute on our allotted time. Mr. Gustafson.
Thank you. Is it better to email that or bring it up in the next meeting so all commissioners can hear it?
You would need to bring it up before all the commissioners. If you want to email that to me ahead of time, that would be appreciated, because then we can be prepared to help figure out where that might fit in or if there are any issues related to it. But do not mail to all the commissioners. That's one of those bozo no-nos under state law.
Yeah, but I would suggest if you want to bring something up that you let Director Cotterman know, so that if it does require a little bit of additional staff thought or investigation, they can do that and be prepared at the meeting rather than have to scramble or carry it over. So.
Right. And I can prepare, if I get several, I can prepare a list and send that out to the commission as part of the packet. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Okay, any closing comments in our last seconds of allotted time for this meeting? All right, I want to thank you all for your attendance this evening and attention to these complicated matters. Clearly, we'll be discussing it some more. But with that said, being no further business, we'll adjourn this meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission, September 2nd meeting at 9:10 via, at various times popping up here, but 9:10 this evening. So we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.